There's no widespread election voter fraud. There's no evidence of it.
There is actual evidence of trying to cheat the election. It was President Trump.
There are tons of irregularities in the 2020 election that never happened before.
There's people around the dinner table who think the earth is flat.
Anderson,
it doesn't make it real.
We have an interesting panel on CNN as they were further litigating the 2020 election, talking both with debunking claims and also getting fact checks in when possible from Anderson Cooper and Ashley Etienne. So I thought it would make an interesting look over, as I also can provide plenty of additional context for both the fact checks and the lie.
There's no widespread election voter fraud. There's no evidence of it in mail-in ballots. People just discount this. It just like, at this point, it's just like, oh, this is what he does. But is this acceptable? I mean, he's basically. I mean, do you think this is acceptable?
Listen, Anderson, there are a lot of folks out there, literally millions of Americans who had a big problem with 2020.
Well, I know, but
just
factually, they don't have any evidence. Like, courts looked at it. I know a lot of people because it's promoted on a lot of networks and a lot of radio networks, but just saying a lot of people feel this doesn't make it true. I think you know it's not true, I assume, but there's no evidence.
Look, as I said before, there are tons of irregularities in the 2020 election that never happened before, right? There are people who have problems with it, and that's something for your network to investigate. I mean, I think it's a good topic.
What are the tons of irregularities?
Sure. Suspension of state laws that didn't happen before COVID, drop boxes that are unsecure.
Anderson Cooper is absolutely right when he says there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud, and over 60 court cases have affirmed that. Trump saying he'd release evidence and have it in a press conference next week and then never doing it also affirms that. He wouldn't do it because he doesn't have the evidence, because if he had the evidence, he surely would do it. And the claims that this man is making that prove election fraud are also super weak points that are easily proven wrong and have long been debunked. Rudy Giuliani spread the lies about drop boxes that he's echoing here, and then he went in court and admitted that he lied about them, but said it was his First Amendment right to do so, which is pretty hilarious that people still spread the lie after that. They just have no care. They don't care at all, right? They're just parroting propaganda willingly. And the state changes he's talking about are laws that made it easier to vote without getting COVID in the middle of a COVID pandemic. So they kind of make sense. And a lot of it had to do with mail-in voting, which a few things to know. In 2016, 25% of total voters voted by mail. And notice how, because Trump won, he didn't launch some large-scale conspiracy about voter fraud because it's only about him losing. From 2000 to 2014, only 31 instances of voter fraud this way have been found from over billions of votes cast, by the way. Trump's own voter fraud commission disbanded without any evidence of rampant mail-in voter fraud, and none of the states that hold elections primarily by mail, which is 5 states currently, have had any voter scandal since making that change, which was far before 2020. So again, it's all lies and conjecture meant to convince gullible people who don't really know what they're talking about on the issue.
No, I ran in 2020 and I lost in 2020, but there are many people, to include folks in my family, who had issues with the way that 2020 was handled, had issues with Zuckerbucks, for example, hundreds of millions of dollars being sent through nonprofits to get out the vote.
Right. There's people who think the earth is flat.
Precincts.
Again,
there's
it doesn't. There's people around the dinner table who think the earth is flat.
Anderson,
it doesn't make it real.
That is a cold line from Anderson there. And the way to finish it off is you can look around and think the world is flat because it looks flat. You can get 100,000 people to look around and agree with you, but through historical precedents, statistical analysis, and empirical data, you can come to the objectively factual conclusion that the world is indeed not flat. And the same can be said about the election and people's thoughts on that. It's human nature that if you hear something enough times, you may start to think it's true, but that'll never make it true, especially when there's plenty of evidence that we can look at to disprove each and every claim that these people make.
There are people who committed election fraud, and they are attorneys allegedly working for the former president who actually, orchestrated a plan to get voting machines, take them to hotel rooms and break into them, and they're being prosecuted right now in states throughout the United States.
Absolutely, and those people some of them have pled guilty, and the others have been indicted. And those are staffers as close to the former president, one of whom was actually his former chief of staff. But Anderson, the reason I want to jump in here is because you talked about evidence of cheating, and there is actual evidence of trying to cheat the election. It was President Trump. He called Georgia's Secretary of State and asked for 11,000 votes. You could actually cue that video. There's audio of it. He doesn't even deny it. He was impeached the first time for attempting to try to cheat the election. And then to your point, he launched a national scheme to actually do that. And when he did not succeed, what did he do? He threw an entire tantrum and incited an insurrection, a deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol.
She really knows her stuff. Like, this was an amazing response. Lawyers Trump endorsed and worked with have since been charged with felonies pertaining to voter fraud from trying to tamper with voting machines. Kind of weird, because I thought it was those pesky Democrats, right? Trump also pressured state officials, as she mentioned, and what she didn't mention is Trump enlisted fake electors in 7 states to subvert the will of the voters within those states. The truth of the matter is that there was an attempt to defraud and steal the election that did happen in 2020. I'll admit it, there was. But it was all by Trump and Republicans, and yet they want to point fingers at Democrats. This is like a mirroring or whatever it's called, right? The Spider-Man meme where they're just pointing at each other, where Trump and Republicans did all this like attempts at stealing the election, and then they're like, but those Democrats did it. It's the same people who are now pretending to be all about voting integrity and security in our elections, which is hypocritical and hilarious that MAGA actually buys into it, when you would think, and I personally could take their voter fraud claims a lot more serious if they had a problem or showed any bit of motive to vote against the guy who actually tried to do it in 2020.